Welcome to my YouTube channel, Netty the Coder. Today we're going to be talking about React.js and we're going to talk about birth of React.js, what is React.js and why React.js was created. So React came out in 2013, but what we had before then and what we had before React.js. Well, the front end landscape was very different initially back in 2000 or in the 90s. We just had basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. HTML displayed the text on our web pages, CSS used to style our web pages, and JavaScript allows us to have some interactivity in the web page and manipulate our web pages. And initially, it just started with simple forms where we sent from the backend to when we go to a URL, and all these files were sent to us. And then when a user, let's say, submit a form, we simply send that back to the server and store that information, and then send back the new data or new pages to the browser. Now, if a user clicked on, let's say, a link in the page, well, once again, we simply request a new HTML file from the server, and that gets sent to the front end, and that's how website works for many years. So there's always, for each event we used to send the HTML files, CSS, and JavaScript files to the server, and then the server would respond with those files or with the manipulations. But there is a problem here. You see all these websites which runs on different browsers, and all these browsers were worked on by different groups of developers. So each of these browsers implemented their browsers differently. So what happened was, as we wanted to use more and more JavaScript in our web pages, we had to account for all these browser, accommodate for all of these browser, and that sometimes work differently from each other. And we had to accommodate JavaScript to work with these different browsers. There was this compatibility issue of JavaScript with all of these browsers. Now, eventually, we had jQuery came out, which allowed developers to easily interact with DOM or document object model across all these browsers. So we didn't have that compatibility issue no more. So you can see that we have JavaScript library over here, that is jQuery, and we have a different syntax of dealing with events and how we can hide and show different elements on the DOM, and how we can manipulate DOM, or how we can send a request through the Ajax using jQuery. You see, back in the day, if we went to a website and, for example, in who clicked on the developer mode and then developer tools, and we went to the elements over here, this is basically the DOM that builds our web page. It displays exactly how our web page should look like, and it is a tree-like structure. And all JavaScript does is modify or manipulate this DOM. You can remove elements, you can update the elements, and although there is now more similarities and compatibility across different browsers, back in the day we didn't have that. So jQuery made developers happy because it had a unified, easy API that kind of looked like this, instead of a developer trying to think about how to work with the DOM in each of different browsers. So the jQuery said, okay, hey, we'll take care of the complexity for you. Just this is the syntax you'll have to use that work across all of the browser, and you can manipulate the front end or the DOM however you want. So that was great, but with this power, developers started building bigger and bigger applications instead of just something small like forums and just small blogs or something like that. We started getting these massive applications like Facebook, where you got to log in and deal with a lot of things. Let's look at the news feeds, for example, and messages from friends, and as a website turned into these full applications that people can interact with, besides just requesting more and more pages like a blog. Well, libraries like Backbone.js came out because, well, our JavaScript files started getting bigger and bigger, and libraries like Backbone.js allowed us to organize these JavaScript files, and because it became easier and easier to work with the DOM, we had the birth of a single page application. You see, traditionally we just had a small file. We just had a small file for each page, and every time we moved to our different page, we would request from server, while the HTML file, the CSS file, and the JavaScript file, which usually contain jQuery, for each time we clicked on a link or something like that. But with more advancements like we had with jQuery Backbone and something called Ajax, we now had a different system. We generally what generally happened now is, we focus less on HTML and a lot more on the JavaScript. You only load the application code once instead of us making a new request to the server where we return new documents. So every time you make a request, you'll be getting all of these files. But now we just had Ajax in place, and so we will request all of those pages were loaded once on the website load, and then we are manipulating the DOM with through Ajax. Instead of now, our applications acted more like a desktop application where we stayed on the same page entire time, and the JavaScript file simply changes or update the HTML file or the DOM to display new things. For example, you can see the friend list over here. It will get updated eventually. Someone goes offline or comes online, and you can just create a post and post it directly. It will just add a new post to the timeline, and it will not reload the whole page. So you are able to sign into an application and interact with that application without ever speaking to the server anymore. And this way of writing applications, our single page applications, became really, really popular. And in 2010, AngularJS, which was created by Google, really became the standard way of building applications. This way now, uh, unlike jQuery, Angular allowed developers to build these large applications by forming these containers that wrapped your project. And because it was created by Google, it had a lot of power, because people said, well, this is the way we should build our applications. Everything's organized. We have these large JavaScript files, but we can organize them in a standard way. So you had a code now you had a better containers, where you had things like controllers, views, and models. This idea of a model, view, and controller, where each part of the application or each JavaScript file was divided into different things that it did. This idea of organizing our large code so they're easier to work with as teams get larger and larger really made AngularJS popular. But there again was a problem with these frameworks. You see, things started getting more and more complex because of this. As things get bigger and bigger, more things have to happen. And for example, we have this application, and even we have a lot of structure in code now, but still, if the applications get more bigger and bigger, things go crazy. Users are clicking on different buttons, or creating different events, which changes different areas on the applications, which in turn changes different other areas that display different information. So we have more and more complexity now, and although frameworks like AngularJS came out, people started to notice it's getting harder and harder to find bugs in the code and understand how each part of the app was affecting the other. Meanwhile, Facebook developers were finding it hard as well on their end to maintain their application, especially their Facebook Ads application. You see, the Facebook Ads app got more and more features, more and more people were added to the team. Now, the growing number of lines of code, the growing number of people working on that app, their app became really, really difficult to handle, and each update could cause more and more issues where you had all these arrows relating, to each other or pointing to each other, or on certain events will update different places or different components of the page. And after a while, the engineers of Facebook just couldn't help, keep up with the way that they had created this app. They needed to upgrade their code base, and this isn't just special in the front end world. This is all of our programming basically. It is why we need good architecture. we need to think about how we organize our code, how we manipulate data, and how the data flows through our application or through our programs. So Facebook came up with a solution, and that solution worked really, really well for them. That in 2013 they released React, uh, and the developer community at JS conference 2013, and their solution was really, really good. And it took off because React developed a whole new way of building front-end applications now. It also happened that in 2014 AngularJS realized that the way they have architected their framework just didn't allow good applications to be built anymore. So they decided in 2014 that they're going to rewrite the entire library, and they called it Angular because they wanted to do an entire rewrite of a lot of people during that time moved to React. So combined with the fact that AngularJS was getting a complete new rewrite, Facebook was backing up React, and the great principles that React introduced made it what it is today. That is that it became more popular front end and tooled with the most job demand across the world, and being used by very large companies like Airbnb, Uber, Netflix, Twitter, Reddit, Pinterest, PayPal, Stripe, Tumblr, Walmart, etc., etc. However, what made React so great and why React was so became so popular so quickly, what were these principles that made it jump from something that Facebook used to something that developers all over the world use now? So yeah, let's talk about those principles and the upcoming videos, and I'll see you in the next lectures.